Welcome to the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Rosensweet, mom of 3 young people, peaceful parenting coach, and your cheerleader and guide on all things parenting. Each week, we'll cover the tools, strategies, and support you need to end the yelling and power struggles and encourage your kids to listen and cooperate so that you can enjoy your family time. I'm happy to say we have a great relationship with our 3 kids. The teen years have been easy and joyful, not because we're special unicorns, but because my kids were raised with peaceful parenting. I've also helped so many parents just like you stop struggling and enjoy their kids again. I'm excited to be here with you today and bring you the insight and information you need to make your parenting journey a little more peaceful. Let's dive into this week's conversation. Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Today we have a guest expert interview with Victoria Ogunleye, and she is from AMAZE.org, which is a great organization that she's going to tell you about in just a minute. And we are going to be talking about SOGI. And I'm just going to pique your interest there because I'm sure that most of you, like I don't know what SOGI is, but it's something that you will want to learn about from Victoria. So Victoria, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. So, hi everyone. I'm very glad to hear and meet you all. My name is Victoria Ogunleye. I use she, they pronouns. I am the digital sex education manager from AMAZE.org. So, I've been in the sexual health and reproductive field for the last 7+ years. I started out as a peer health educator in college, and then I started to volunteer with Planned Parenthood, and then I've been in charge of peer health wellness programs in various organizations in DC, which led me to now starting to lead our digital sex education with AMAZE. So for those of you who are not familiar with AMAZE, AMAZE is a free online digital sex education platform. So AMAZE creates age-appropriate animated videos for adolescents, and it offers their parents and educators trusted resources to open lines of communication about really important sexual health topics in a very fun, engaging format. We like to lead with comedy a lot of times. So majority of the time our platform is on our YouTube channel, but of course we've expanded to Instagram, we've expanded to Twitter, TikTok, and then of course our website, which is amaze.org. So Amaze is composed of videos where we answer questions that young people want to know, questions about healthy relationships, questions about puberty, sexuality, all things that young people who are starting to develop into being sexual beings want questions about and know that it can be really awkward. We like to say Amaze takes the awkward out of sex. And not only do we provide young people with these tools, but as I mentioned earlier, we do always want to include the parents and educators who are in charge of our young people. So with Amaze, we also provide toolkits, lesson plans, and promotional materials so that everyone who is involved in the young people's lives have the education they need to really support the young people as they continue to grow into young adults.
I love it. And I love AMAZE. I have used it as a parent, recommended it to my daughter. She's watched a bunch of your videos. I tried to get her to apply for the Youth Ambassador, but she was too shy. And I've also recommended it as a coach, as a really, really good resource. So I sought you all out because I love your organization so much. So thank you so much for coming on here. So the reason why I wanted to do this episode is because I just, kind of like, things that I've been reading or chats and things, parents are so confused about, especially about kids. I'm going to say kids today in quotes, who are, what are your pronouns and, what's your gender identity? And they get really confused about, I'm going to let the cat out of the bag. SOGI is an acronym for sexual orientation, SO, gender identity, GI. And a lot of parents, I find, of young people today are confused about what is the difference between gender identity and sexual orientation. And if my kid is using different pronouns, does that mean they're gay? And no, they could be, but that's not what that means. And so parents are confused. So I wanted to invite you on, Victoria, to explain to us about the differences between sexual orientation and gender identity, and also some of the labels that parents might be hearing their kids talking about.
Great. So Yeah, it can be confusing, especially when, some of us who are parents now, who might be parents soon, didn't have like this time to learn or have the education with them. So, it's definitely great that parents are willing to learn and understand. So to hop right in, SOGI is an acronym and it's sexual orientation, gender identity. And sometimes people actually add an E to the end of that. So SOGIE, which also is like gender expression, and we'll get into that a little bit. But the biggest part of SOGI is sexual orientation, gender identity, and really understanding that someone's gender identity, sexual expression, and then the sexual orientation, they don't have to match up. And in that sense, that it doesn't mean that if someone's gender identity is one thing, then you will automatically assume that what their sexual orientation. That is not it. Gender identity and sexual orientation do not equate. Neither does gender expression and sexual orientation. So, a person's sexual orientation is determined by the gender or genders of the people that that person is romantically and or sexually attracted to. So, some of us are familiar with some of the common sexual orientations such as gay, lesbian, maybe bisexual, and queer. Understanding that queer was used as a slur or a way to harm people of this community in the past, but in today's age, people do use queer as an encompassed term to describe that they're not heterosexual, which is also a type of sexual orientation. And then we also have some sexual orientation that people may not be really familiar with. So you might hear your young people persons say that they are pansexual, that they are asexual, they're aromantic, or they're demisexual. What's really important to remember once again is that someone's sexual orientation can change. So a young person can identify as bisexual, and then maybe in a month or two they realize that they want to identify as asexual or that they might identify as lesbian. And that's okay because we like to say that, gender identity and sexual orientation is on a spectrum, that there's a lot of fluidity in between it. Just because one person is saying that, this is their sexual orientation, even if it changes, it's really important to understand that it might not be a phase in that young person's life, but it really is just changing to how they are growing and getting to learn who they are and what their sexual and romantic attraction is. So I know our young people are always like, my parents think this is a phase. They don't like that. It's not a phase. They're telling you who they are and who they're sexually and romantically attracted to. So definitely believe them.
So yeah, if you think it's a phase, worst thing you can do is say that to your kid. So just zip it.
Yep, definitely. So then we move into gender identity. So gender identity is a person's experience of their own gender, a person's like innermost concept of self. And that's usually on a scale of going back and forth between feeling more masculine, feeling more feminine, maybe a blend of both, maybe feeling some other genders that I'll list in a bit, or none, not feeling like they're on that spectrum at all. And a person's gender identity is not always congruent with their biological sex or gender assigned at birth. And once we talk about this amazing genderbread person, we'll get into what I just meant about biological sex and gender assigned at birth. So, a few labels that you might hear when someone says that, this is my gender identity is it could be someone who's cisgender, someone who's transgender, someone that's non binary.
Can you just explain for people who don't know what cisgender
Sure.
means?
Yeah. So cisgender is a term to describe someone whose gender matches what they were assigned at birth. So, for example, if someone was assigned female at birth because a doctor looked at their like external genitals and saw a vagina and was like, okay, we're assigning you female at birth, and someone who's cisgender still will identify as female. They'll still identify as that. Versus on the other hand, someone who's transgender, they don't typically identify as the gender that they were assigned as at birth.
Yeah, and so that is the gender identity part of
Yes.
the sexual orientation part, just to recap a little bit, is who you are romantically and or sexually attracted to, and the gender identity is what the gender is that you identify with, whether or not it's the gender you were assigned at birth.
Yes, perfect.
And
Great. You got it.
that's where the pronouns come in.
Sometimes, yes. So with pronouns is pronouns have always existed. Let's get that right first. So people always say, pronouns are new. And there are some newer pronouns, but pronouns have always existed. And sometimes a person's pronouns might actually equate to their gender identity. So someone who is cisgender, a cisgender female, might use she, her pronouns. But then someone who is cisgender might use she, they pronouns in the sense that they feel like they're not limited to female. They're not limited to womanness. They feel more expansive in that way. And then people who may use they, them pronouns, they don't want to, typically don't want to identify on that binary scale of male, female, men, woman. They really feel like they're more expansive of that, and using she, he pronouns could limit it. And then you have people who might use all pronouns, which they're comfortable with all pronouns that someone might use to refer to them if they're not referring to someone's name.
Like Jonathan on my favorite show, Queer Eye. He's he, she, they.
Yeah, yes, definitely. And some people might list their pronouns in the way that they will prefer. So it might be he, she, they. It could be they, she, her. It just really depends. It's a very personal preference. And that's why gender identity is so unique to that one person who tells you who their gender identity is, because it's really different for everyone.
Okay, cool. And so I've had people ask me, I'm cisgender woman, and I have in my email signature and like on my Zoom thing, I says she, her. And I've had people ask me like, well, why, if you're cisgender, why do you have your pronouns listed? And for anyone who wonders about that, it's just in my mind, it's a way of increasing safety for people who have different pronouns than people might
Hmm.
expect. And so it sort of normalizes that we always want to ask, if we want to ask what your pronouns are, we want to say what your pronouns are. And I think it's really sweet. My sister has a just turned 5-year-old who asks whenever she meets a new kid at the playground, she says, what are your pronouns?
Oh.
I just love that.
Yeah, no, that's really beautiful. And yeah, I echo everything that you said. It's a way of just trying to like get rid of that layer that we just try to assume what someone's gender identity is based off of what their name might look like or what their email profile picture is. And then you also have people who don't choose to use pronouns. So I met someone this weekend and they were like, this is my name. I don't use any pronouns, just refer to me as my name, just because they don't feel comfortable or they're just not interested in people using any pronouns to describe them. They're just like, this is who I am, just my name. And
Interesting.
you do have some youth also. This is something I realized or learned when I started to teach online more when the pandemic first hit, that we were asking all of the youth to, list your name, your first and last name, and then put your pronouns. But we had some youth who weren't sure. They didn't know what their pronouns were. They didn't know what they were comfortable sharing. We had some youth that wanted to change their pronouns, but they weren't comfortable changing it in public yet. Some youth who it just wasn't safe for them to share their pronouns or share what their gender identity or sexual orientation was. So I will always say, don't assume and always ask. But then also, it's really important to know that in some cases, there are some youth who will not share that information or who may not even know it to give it to you. So it's always just giving space to say, okay, really, hi, how are you doing? And then you can say, I'm Victoria. These are my pronouns. So and so. And then waiting for that person to then share with you whatever they want to share, which could then be, I'm so and so, and these are my pronouns, or I'm just so and so, and this is it.
Yeah, and I think for some of my listeners this might be a new concept, and hopefully they've stuck with us this far with an open mind. And I just want to remind everybody about our peaceful parenting values of kindness and compassion, even if they think this is like the silliest thing they've ever heard, to remember like kindness and compassion, and that we don't have to agree with people to empathize, and that we can always respect other people's choices and their self-expression. And so I just want to, especially nowadays with, I'm going to say my country, even though I live in Canada now, I'm American. It's like my country's so divided. And if we all could just like take a little dose of like peacefulness and kindness and compassion, I think it would really go a long way in listening to people that you maybe don't understand. So that's part of the reason why I wanted to bring you on here, is because I think that there are a lot of people who are maybe confused and don't really understand this. So thank you for bringing it up for us. And
Yeah.
I wanted to mention, you mentioned the genderbread person, and that's a really cool graphic that Victoria shared with me. That sort of it's a review of everything that she's talking about today, and so we'll link to that in the show notes. Also, the genderbread graphic. What else was there that you wanted to share with us?
Sure. So if you pause and went to go look at the graphic before I go into it, that'd be great. But if you're looking at this sheet right here, it's a genderbread person, you need a gingerbread person, but a genderbread person. And what it does is just shows or kind of tries to break down all things that are related to sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. So I'll just take it back a little bit so that, I like to stay organized. I'm going to stay organized with the document. So in the beginning, it just really shows like gender identity, and it kind of shows it as like a ray or a spectrum, where it says gender identity is like represented with a brain symbol, and it's really like how someone feels when you look at yourself. When you think of yourself, this is how you feel, and sometimes that could be with more woman or womanness, and that could change depending on the day. It could be feeling more of like man and manness, and that can change on the day. Also, it's really important to know that a lot of times when we say man or woman and how we feel or how we might show up, or those actions that we take based off of we say how we feel, are really heavily influenced by gender stereotypes. Because in some countries, gender stereotypes are very different from where they are here. So, example I always like to give my kids is, here in America, people who are women or femme identified will wear skirts, right? And if someone who is perceived man or male and they're wearing a skirt, it's usually like, oh, that's not what men or boys do. But in other areas of the world, people wear skirts and kilts, and people who are male identified or are men, they wear skirts and that's normal. And that this kind of goes into gender expression. But typically with gender identity is just how someone feels on the scale of society's ideas of what it is to be man and woman and how they personally feel.
If I could cut in for a second about gender
Mhm.
identity and gender expression, somebody could have their gender identity be very male, but their gender expression might go towards the society's idea of feminine gender expression, right? Like,
Yes.
or the other way around. And I actually read this there was a guy profiled in the New Yorker recently who's a fashion designer, and he is a cisgender man, and his gender identity is man, and his gender expression is very feminine. Like, they had a lot of pictures of him, and he said that he used to use they pronouns, but he recently started using he pronouns again because he felt it was limiting. This is just an anecdote, just to tell you. He thought it was limiting to have people think that if your gender expression was more on the feminine side, it would automatically mean that you were not gender identity as man. I just thought that
Mhm.
was really interesting.
Yeah, no, definitely. These things are not like they do not equate at all. They're not related in any way. So, like us, if you all are looking at the genderbread person document or spreadsheet, you'll see that it says like identity does not equal expression and expression does not equal sex. These things are all completely independent of their own. And what makes everyone so different and so unique is how we choose to embody these different identities. So these young people might, someone might identify as cisgender. They're still a cisgender girl. They still identify with the female sex assigned at birth as they do now, but they really want to dress masculine. They like what's considered masculine clothing, and but their sexual orientation might still be heterosexual. So these things are really independent of their own, and the best thing we can do is just get out of assumptions. And it is hard because we're humans and we've just been socialized and taught to assume everything. However, this is why these podcasts exist, these conversations exist. My role and job exists is to just get people to get out of assumption and just understand that everything's really independent of its own. It's kind of like different puzzle pieces, and each different puzzle pieces makes that one person who they are. I really like that. That was cute.
Yes,
It
love
makes
it.
the person who they are. So yeah, so as we move from gender identity, we go into gender expression. And this is really tied to stereotypes, shared to how someone might dress or their mannerisms. A lot of it could really really change as somebody's sense of style changes. So just think about like what you used to wear when you were a young person and what you wear now. It's probably very different. So this is the same thing. So at least I can speak for myself. I know that there are some days I wake up and I'm like, I don't want to touch a dress or a skirt. I'm like, give me all things that are makes me look a little bit more masculine. And then there are other days where I wake up and I want a mix of it. And there are other days where I just want to be the most feminine person I can think of. And that's fine. And that is what you might be seeing with your young person is that each day or maybe, each year it changes with them. But once again, to emphasize that it's okay if that changes and not to look at it as a phase, but just really look at someone expressing themselves as how they feel. And then we can then go into anatomical sex. So, anatomical sex typically is linked to sex assigned at birth, where someone is assigned by a doctor right when they're born that they are female, that they are male, and then there's also intersex. So, normally when a newborn baby is in this world, a doctor will say, okay, I see a vagina, so this is a female. I see a penis and testicles, so this is a male. However, there are intersex people who might be born with a combination of female and male sex organs. And sometimes it's not always sex organs that you can see. Some of it might be internally, it might be the type of hormones a person produces, and it also could deal with their types of chromosomes. So sometimes people don't identify with what that sex that was assigned with them at birth because they don't really connect with it based off of how they actually feel. This is what they were told when they were born, this is how they were assigned, but it's not how they truly feel about themselves because there are people who truly feel like they are outside of that spectrum.
Do you know how common the intersex is?
Yeah, so about 2% of the world's population actually intersex. I know that they always typically share the fact that if you've ever seen someone who is a natural born with red hair, then you probably know someone who is intersex.
Same
Yes.
commonality, yeah.
Yeah, same commonality. So about 2% of the world's population. And there's so many different variations of intersex, which maybe we can go into a whole nother time. I'm not the person for that one. But
Okay.
there's so many variations that a lot of times there are youth who and babies who are like incorrectly assigned a certain sex at birth because the doctor is just going based off of what they see. So that's why we always say that once again, identity and gender expression and sex is very different. And then also with anatomical sex is you can have someone who is, let's say, a transgender male. So they might still have a vagina, but they identify as a male. So the anatomical sex, those organs might be considered more female or femaleness, but their gender identity is male. They identify as a man, they present as a boy.
Just so for people to understand, when someone's gender identity, how they feel, whether they feel more male or feel more female, doesn't match their anatomical sex or their sex assigned at birth, that's somebody who's transgender.
Yes, or they can, well, let's see. Someone who's transgender is they don't typically identify with the sex assigned at birth.
Right.
So, yes. So if there's whatever their sex assigned at birth was, they don't identify with it. Mhm.
Right. Yes.
But anatomical sex can change. Anatomical sex is not related to gender identity, just
Right.
because, yeah, someone's gender identity versus what their anatomical sex is could be extremely different in different combinations, variations.
Yes. Got it.
Mhm.
Okay. Because I think some parents might not exactly understand what transgender is either.
Mhm.
So that's good to know.
Yes.
Well, what else do you want parents to know about? I think we've gone over the labels. We're going to link the genderbread. I imagine they can find genderbread person if they
Mhm.
just Google it also, but we'll link that in the show notes because it's a handy reference. Is there anything else that you think parents commonly don't understand or get wrong about SOGI, sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression
Mhm.
that you want them to
Yeah.
know about?
Yeah, definitely. I would say the last 2 points would probably be just like the last two sections of the spreadsheet is that so what So what someone is or who someone is attracted to sexually may not always be the same as who they might be romantically attracted to. So when we say sexually is that they want to have some type of sexual interaction with that person. Or romantically might be that they really like this person and they might want to be in a relationship with this person, but it doesn't always necessarily mean that they want to have any type of sexual interaction, or they have a sexual attraction to this person. And I say that because you do have a lot of young people who are asexual or aromantic. So a young person who's asexual has little to no sexual desire typically to someone. However, they might be aromantic, that they might have a crush or they have feelings to someone, but they don't want to enact on any sexual relations with that person or the other young person. And on the other hand is you might have someone who's aromantic, meaning that they just are just really romantically attracted to someone and they're not really interested in us building a sexual relation with them. And I think it's important to know that those two are also kind of independent of themselves because once again, not everyone is going to be romantically and sexually attracted to the same gender or to the same person. It really varies. And I think that's really important because I know that a lot of young people have said to me, like, I'm actually asexual or I'm aromantic, but my parents don't believe me when I tell them this. And it's always just like trying to affirm them that, like, you know who you are sexually attracted to and not, you know who you are romantically attracted to. And if we can get parents to believe these young people, to support them, to affirm them, and to give them the support they need as they navigate this and figure it out, that's really our goals, is to like lead young people to be the best versions of themselves. That's my goal as an educator. So I always just like to point that out there because of course there's so many things that go into sexual orientation and gender identity, and attraction, whether it be sexually or romantically, also does play a part in that.
And also just reminding parents your kid is still your kid.
Yeah.
No matter what their labels are or any of the things we've been talking about, they're still your kid.
Yeah. No matter how they identify.
Yeah, still the kid you love.
Love
Thank you
that.
so much, Victoria.
Mhm.
I'm going to ask you a question that I ask all my guests, and it's going to be a little bit different from you because you don't have kids yet. And usually I ask my guests, I don't even know if you want kids, but usually I ask my guests if they could go back in time, what advice would they give to their younger parent selves? So I'm going to ask you, if you ever have children, what advice do you want to remember to give to
Good
yourself?
question. Yeah, that is a really good question. I like to think of my niece as my child. So I would say the advice would be to stand in what you feel and know. I think a lot of times society just teaches us that, like, because you're young, you don't know everything, which is true. But just because you're young doesn't mean that you aren't your own best observer of who you are, right? I'm not, saying like I'm 10 and I know how to drive a car. I've never driven a car. But if I'm saying like, I think I'm attracted to this person in this type of way, or I feel this type of way to any type of thing or any type of topic, it's true. And you don't need to let someone sway you or move you from that point. Like, you are your biggest advocate and you know yourself better than anyone else. So I think that is probably like one of the biggest advice I would give is just like, stand and affirm how you feel because it's you. No one else is you. No one else lives your life. And regardless of how many supportive people you might have in your life, what your relationship is with the adults in your life, it's you. Like, it's just very you. It's very personal feeling. And it's just something that it can be very hard to stand in and affirm, just because of the world and how dynamics are and the power dynamics between children and adults, which is there. And I think it's really important to recognize. But that's why the young people who we interact with are so great because they're like, no, this is who I am. So either you listen or I'm out of here or something like that. So I would say that's probably like one of my best advice
I
or the
love
advice
it.
I'd give.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for listening.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. I hope you found this conversation insightful and exactly what you needed in this moment. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Remember that I'm rooting for you. I see you out there showing up for your kids and doing the best you can. Sending hugs over the airwaves today. Hang in there. You've got this.